Hello again, fellow badasses. As promised, here's another video with some hints and tips and how to live with chronic diarrhea. So I thought I'd do that today whilst I am doing some makeup because that's fun and I like doing it, so why not? So I'm going to tell you about my diagnosis. So I was told for years and years and years that I had IBS, just IBS, and that was it. I just had IBS, and that's why I was going to the bathroom so frequently. So I was like, okay, all right, that has an explanation, it's got a diagnosis, that sounds okay. And so I looked into it and I found out about FODMAP diets and did that and looked at it. And for years and years and years, that was fine. So that was when I was around 18 or 19. And for years and years and years, I was able to manage my symptoms effectively by avoiding certain foods and over-the-counter medication. So it wasn't a problem. So in 2013, I had my gallbladder removed. And immediately after the surgery, my abdominal symptoms were so much worse than they were before, and I didn't know why. Literally the very next day after the surgery, I had a very painful abdominal spasm and I passed out at home. It was so painful, in fact, I got a hernia from straining, and I got a hernia on the line where the stitching was for the surgery, and it was called an incisional hernia. So I then had to wait a few years to get the hernia repaired, and my symptoms were getting worse. They're a bit more dramatic, and I was finding it more and more difficult to get the over-the-counter medication to work. So at that point, I just thought it was just because of all the stress of having to wait for a second surgery and so forth. And after the second surgery, and I had my hernia repaired, again, my symptoms got dramatically worse. So that was in 2016. And it went from having to use the bathroom very frequently and having pain and discomfort to constantly having very urgent bowel movements and not being able to control them at all with over-the-counter medication anymore. And even to the point where I would actually faint or pass out from the pain, and it just wasn't working anymore. And I'd been to see my GP, and I'd been told, it's just IBS, you've had it for years, you just need to get on with it. And I said, this isn't normal. This isn't normal to feel like this every day. This is completely different. And I was just basically told that I was exaggerating the symptoms and it's IBS and I just need to get on with it. So then came a more serious episode where I was at work and I had an episode where I fully passed out. I felt this was always what the episodes were like. I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom urgently and there was extreme pain. And so I was running to go to the bathroom. I got to the bathroom and I blacked out and hit my head on a radiator. Had a massive cut on my head. I've got a scar here actually in my hairline. I hit my head on the corner of the radiator once when I was falling down, and then I hit my head a second location over here on the valve of the radiator. My head wedged to the side, so my head was above my heart. I didn't come round immediately, and that was problematic because it took more time for me to come around, and my knee kept on banging against the wall. So that's what your body does. If the blood can't get into your head easily to regain consciousness, your joints will move to try and kind of kickstart your awareness, essentially, to get you to come around. And so that was happening, and eventually I came back around, and I was very disoriented when I came around. I didn't quite know what was happening. I was on the floor, my nose was bleeding, my mouth was full of blood because I'd bitten my tongue, and it was very upsetting. So I came out of the bathroom, and one of my colleagues saw me and they said, "Are you okay?" I said, "No, I've just passed out and hit my head." So an ambulance was called, and they came and got me, and I went to A&E, and whilst I was there, I explained what had happened, and because I'd had a head injury, they had to do lots of different tests, like physical tests, see if I had any neurological deficits, physical tests to see if there were any abdominal blockages like that. And I was explaining my symptoms and that it had happened several times and that I didn't know what was causing it. And I had to have x-rays because they thought I might have fractured my skull, various different tests. And towards the end, when they couldn't find anything on the test results, all my blood tests were fine, everything was coming back normally, nothing was abnormal to the point where they were like, okay, this is something pointing in a particular direction. And I was having a word with the doctor again, and they literally said to me, "I simply don't believe abdominal pain is bad enough to cause you to pass out. There must be something else wrong." So this, can you imagine? I was explaining what had been happening to me for over a year at this point, and you're being told they don't believe you. So that was fun. So basically went to my GP the next day and was very annoyed and said, "This isn't normal. I've told you about it. It's happened. A more serious thing has happened now, and I'm not happy about it at all." So they prescribed me some medication to see if it would help, and said that they would, they didn't know what it was either. So they said they would do some kind of inter-GP conference to see if anyone knew this collection of weird symptoms: severe abdominal pain, urgency to use the bathroom, and then loss of consciousness. And so they kind of went away. But my employer was very concerned, as you would imagine, for a workplace injury to happen and there's no diagnosis in place and it's a serious head injury, and I'm sure they were concerned about their liability. So they referred me to an occupational health doctor. So I saw the occupational health doctor and they said, "You are not fit for work. This is a serious issue. It's unacceptable to just say there's nothing serious going on, and we need to have this matter addressed and get a diagnosis, and you're not fit to go back to work." So that was quite stressful as well, because I do love work and I was worried about what would happen, essentially. If I couldn't get a diagnosis, which is what I'd been trying to get for a long time, I'd periodically seen my GP to say, "Look, this is still going on, there's no reprieve," but was really getting nowhere. There was no curiosity to find out what the root cause was. There was a preference to prescribe something to manage my symptoms, to make me feel a little bit better, to get me to go away, essentially. And so I saw the occupational health and was sent home, essentially. And so I requested, they said I needed to have neurology rule out a various number of possibly epilepsy or seizure disorders, which is what the doctor at the hospital had suggested it might be, because abdominal problems weren't serious enough to cause loss of consciousness, or cardio problems. So I was, they said I needed to see a cardiologist and a neurologist. And if you've ever tried to get a referral through the NHS for something like that, you know how difficult it is, or how long you might have to wait to actually get a referral like that. And so that was quite frustrating because I was worried about how long everything would take, given that I needed to get these diagnoses before I could go back to work. And, you know, there's only so long you can be off sick and get sick pay before they look at terminating your employment. So at the time, my partner worked in a place where part of his remuneration package was that he had AXA healthcare, and I was named on his policy. So he said, okay, well, why don't we just see the doctors privately to see what can happen? So I called up and found out that I saw a cardiologist that very day, and I saw a neurologist 2 days later. So I did lots and lots and lots of testing with the cardiologist and the neurologist, and they ruled out any kind of issue from neurology and cardiology. They completely ruled out epilepsy and arrhythmia. I had a variety of MRIs and different scans and so forth, all fairly immediately. It was amazing. I didn't have to pay for it, but I got pretty much instantaneous access to advanced testing and so forth. So still no diagnosis at this point, so still couldn't go back to work. And saw the occupational health the second time, and they were like, no, now we've exhausted these routes, let's talk to a gastro person about this. So I eventually saw a gastroenterologist who was very understanding, and he said to me, I know what it is, I have to rule out these other illnesses first, and then we're going to get you a diagnosis and we're going to get you into a much better position. He had to rule out Crohn's and colitis because the illness that I have mirrors many of the symptoms that Crohn's and colitis have, but it's much rarer, and a lot of GPs have never heard of it. It's known in the gastro world, but it's not really a known illness outside of the gastro world. So, true to his word, he did lots of tests. He did lots of MRIs, blood tests, everything. Ruled out Crohn's and colitis by having a double endoscope, so in both ends, orally, rectally, completely ruled out Crohn's and colitis. The Moviprep, if you've ever had those scopes, you know how horrible and vile that is, and worst of all, you can't have the medication that helps you to control your diarrhea for a week before you have that scan. That was a week from hell, great sadness. And so after that, we finally spoke about what he thought it was. He thought it was an illness called bile acid malabsorption, meaning my body is incapable of absorbing bile in my digestive system, which causes this extreme reaction of urgently needing to go to the bathroom, but also abdominal spasms, which was causing the severe pain that I was having. And the test for that is called a CCAT scan. So they use a gamma camera and you swallow a radioisotope, and you go in for a scan, and then 7 days later you go in for another scan, and they measure how much bile has been absorbed in your digestive tract over the last 7 days. And by that they can tell if you have this illness called BAM, and they can also classify how severe it is. So most people can absorb quite a lot of bile, over 15% of the bile that goes through the digestive tract can be absorbed through digestion and so forth. And people with BAM have lower than 15%. And mine was very low. It was in fact 4%, which puts me in the severe BAM category. And whereas patients who have colitis and Crohn's can often get acquired BAM if they have bowel resections and so forth, I didn't have any ulceration, so I'd never had a bowel resection. So I had a fully intact digestive system. So it explained why I was having such severe pain and passing out and suffering all kinds of other joint and head injuries because of all the collapses. So at that point, I was basically fainting every day, which the neurologist explained the difference to me. A fainting is when you get very dizzy, you can't move or stand up, you feel very unwell, and you feel like you're going to pass out. And a loss of consciousness is when you fully lose consciousness. So I was basically fainting every day for a long time period before I actually got an answer as to why. So I found out what the actual cause of my illness was, and it was real, and it was measurable, and it wasn't in my head. These are some of the things I've literally been told over the years by doctors. It's not that bad. It's just IBS. I don't know why you're making such a fuss. I don't believe you. And various other very dismissive statements. So to be told that not only was it a real illness, but it was also a measurable illness was very, I felt vindicated that something was wrong with me and that I knew what it was and that it was measurable. It wasn't just a diagnosis of excluding other things like IBS. You'll get labelled with IBS if they can't quite figure out that it's not this, that or the other. So this time I had an actual diagnosis. And with the diagnosis and also the fact that the classification of the illness was that it was quite severe, I got much better access to medication, other medications, and better medications to help manage my symptoms. So with BAM, not only do you get the chronic diarrhea, it's actually classified as chronic explosive diarrhea. I bet you didn't know that diarrhea could get worse, right? So diarrhea, which is what most people get if they catch a flu or a virus of some kind and they need to go to the bathroom all the time. Chronic explosive diarrhea is where you're not only is the content of your digestive tract more liquid and on the soft side, but you also get severe abdominal spasms, which is violently trying to move the process along. Chronic explosive diarrhea is literally what it sounds like. Not only are you pooping violently, you're pooping so violently it's going to cause you to pass out. So I'm medically incapable of being full of shit, which is good to know. So you get lots of wind, bloating, spasms, serious pain, serious pain, enough to cause you to pass out. And it still happens, but I have better medication to manage my symptoms more effectively. Whereas before I was managing my symptoms exclusively with over-the-counter medication because the GP wouldn't prescribe anything without having more of a diagnosis. So having a diagnosis meant that I got much better medication that controlled my symptoms much more effectively. If I stop taking the medication, my symptoms come back immediately. There's no cure for BAM. We call it BAM, bile acid malabsorption. Sometimes it's called bile acid diarrhea. So BAD, there's a really good website called BAD UK where you can get lots of information about all the symptoms. Everyone on there has a story like mine for 20 years, 10 years, 15 years. They were told it was something else. They needed to just pull themselves together and get on with it. And then eventually get a diagnosis. And then end up finding out they've got BAM. So that was a relief to finally get a diagnosis. And to hear that it wasn't just in my head anymore. So years on, 2023 now, I have a diagnosis and it's an illness that will never get better. There's no cure for it. Some things have diminished over time. Some things are fine. So because it's a malabsorption disorder, you end up having a lot of vitamin deficiencies. So I struggle with fat-soluble vitamins, like vitamins A, D, E and K. And I also have problems with a lot of B vitamins, because B vitamins get absorbed in the large intestines, which is the part of my body that's defective. And so I struggle with B12 and B9 in particular. I get anemia frequently and serious anemia to the point where I can pass out just from being dizzy. And I often have to have a lot of prescribed tablets and also injections. Now, the tablets don't work, obviously, because they work based on being able to nutritionally absorb, whereas that's not something that's easy to do for a person with BAM. So I often have to end up having injections of B12 and B9 is more of a struggle because most GPs will not authorise having an injection of B12. So that's an ongoing problem that I deal with. As I said before, I have joint injuries and other injuries from passing out a lot. So I walk with a cane now. I've been using a cane for the last 4 years. And so that has its own struggles in its own way. But I feel better and safer walking when using the cane as opposed to not using the cane. So it's worth it in that own way that I'm able to actually walk around more slowly but more safely. So I'm less likely to fall over, because if I feel dizzy or something's unsteady, then I have the cane for additional support. Excuse me. What else? So struggling with vitamin deficiencies, mobility issues, mental health is a big problem, because vitamin deficiency, so B12 in its own right, can have all kinds of neurological symptoms. So over the last 2 years, I've been having lots of, we think, visual hallucinations, or it could be neurological damage from anemia. I see things in the corner of my eyes. It could have, my GP thought it might have been macular degeneration, psychosis, or neurological damage. It's not macular degeneration, the optician ruled that out. For psychosis, they increased the dosage of my medication that I take for my mental health, and that did not improve over time. And so therefore we're left with, it's probably irreversible neurological damage. So that's fun. So I have these visual hallucinations now with chronic migraines. Chronic migraines are related to vitamin D deficiency. So if you have chronic migraines, you might want to look into having your vitamin D levels checked. So I have to take medication, injections, tablets, and all sorts of ways I can get of having more vitamin D. Over-the-counter kind of vitamins that you can buy in a chemist don't work for someone with BAM. They give dosages that are at the level of what the recommended daily allowance is. I tend to have prescriptions for medications that are hundreds or even thousands of times that level of dosage in order to get the whatever percentage I can actually absorb of that, which is much smaller in comparison. So there is that. So that's a constant struggle. I have to have blood tests very frequently. I have to have lots of things checked up all the time. Memory gets affected, so I get brain fog. Mental health, so I get anxiety and depression. I get anxiety about if I have to leave the house and go to a new place that I've never been before, or just literally being outside, because I know I'm not near a bathroom. I panic then because I don't know where the nearest bathroom is. So I'm like the Terminator for toilets. Instead of looking for Sarah Connors, I'm looking for toilets, and I murder every one of them. So I like to stay at home a lot. I get anxiety if I don't stay at home. So that's comes down to social issues then. And it's kind of getting to the point where it's agoraphobia kind of level that I don't like to go outside. So it makes socialising more difficult, going to new places. I have to do a lot of mental preparation to go to new places. Clothes can be quite difficult because I get a lot of bloating during the day. I can bloat as much as 2 dress sizes, to the point where certain bloating, I'll have to take my clothes off and change into something else because the discomfort is so bad that what I'm wearing essentially becomes too painful to wear. So that's fun. Yeah, so there's a lot of really fun symptoms. I'll come up with a more comprehensive list at some point, but just to give you an idea of what I deal with on the daily basis. So even now, at the point where I have better medication, so I was going to the bathroom as much as 20 times a day before having a diagnosis. Now it's as many as 5 times a day, and if you've ever had any of these symptoms before, I'm sure you're very familiar with the Bristol stool chart. Most of the time I'm a grade 4, which is the perfect zone, but sometimes it's 7, which is pure liquid. And those are the fun days where it's like that. Yes, I do get fecal incontinence, and I have to wear incontinence pads, and I will literally not leave the house if I don't have those. So there can be accidents, and so that's never a good thing. Also, there's a lot of being self-conscious about not smelling bad, because of, with the bloating and other symptoms comes gas, and a lot of it. So I'm a professional pooper, and I fart a lot as well, which is fun for everyone involved, and so that can be very upsetting if I feel like other people know or can smell what's going on. So I get very worried about that, and it kind of contributes to the sadness of going outside, essentially. So I don't like that. And so that plays into the physical symptoms and the mental health symptoms there, which makes life a lot more difficult. And just trying to work around that can be a real challenge. I've recently been made redundant as well, which is fun. But I'm seizing the opportunity to actually get myself into a better, more positive well-being routine, because I was working full-time knowing that most people with BAM don't work, and they can be completely housebound because of it. So I was like this kind of unicorn that worked full-time and carried on. I had lots of reasonable adjustments and so forth, but it was certainly a struggle to carry on that burden, essentially, and kind of it was at the expense of everything else. So I would just come home and go to bed immediately and sleep all weekend, and so I had no energy for anything else. So now I'm going to say yes to social situations more, whereas before I was just like, no, I can't do this fun activity because I'm going to need to save up my energy to go to work. And as you know, you get a limited amount of energy when you have a chronic illness, and the fatigue is real. And now I'm going to say yes to social things more. I'm planning on not carrying on in my career as was, but I've got some other projects and ideas that I'm working on, and I'm just going to pivot and see what happens. But I'm looking out for the community to help you to laugh, find the humour in things, not just give all the technical information and say, there you go, that's all you need to know. It's like, how do you live with this awful illness that you also can't talk about, because nobody really wants to hear about how many shits you've had that day, you know, if your bum hurts, because if you're going to the bathroom 20 times a day, it doesn't matter what you're cleaning your bum with, your bum's going to be on fire by the end of the day. Tips on products I use that I find helpful, i.e. for hygiene and so forth. Things that I can do to just cheer myself up, which is a big part of the situation. And that will be helpful to other people who suffer similar symptoms, not just bile acid malabsorption, but Crohn's, colitis, IBS, people that haven't had any diagnosis yet, to kind of see where things are at. So my consultant did say that my symptoms were so extreme because I had an intact digestive tract, and that I had such a low level, but it explains everything. It explains literally all of my symptoms. And so I kind of accept my limitations. I'm happy to accept my limitations and work with them and around them. And I know it may get worse in the future, but I would rather be happy and focus on doing things that co-align with what I want to do, rather than trying to force myself to be energetic all the time when I'm not, and you know, I'm going to listen to myself more when I'm tired. I'm going to have a lie down and do all of those things instead of just ploughing on. I'm going to listen to my body a bit more. So that's what I plan on doing, and that's quite tough in a way to do, because worries about the financial restrictions of not working full-time and so forth. BAM is legally classified as a disability in the UK, in case you were wondering. So I was having lots of reasonable adjustments at work because of the disability status that comes with BAM. I do medically qualify for some benefits, so I'll be claiming for those. They won't be enough to financially sustain me, but I'm going to see what I can do to make that work and work with my resourcefulness as is, whilst trying to hold on to my sanity and feel good at the same time, which is going to be fun, and go from there. But I would like to hear from other people. I want to know, what toilet paper do you use? Do you have a particular way of cleaning that's helpful when you've done a very messy bowel movement? Are there any things that you do that help keep your mental health happy? What do you do when you feel sad and you don't want to get out of bed because you're so tired and exhausted from pooping all night, and you can't tell anyone about it? Do you tell people about it? Because when people ask you, are you okay? Do you just go ahead and tell them anyway and say, and just not give in when their eyes are saying, no, please stop, don't tell me anymore? What do you do? Do people ask? Do you have any of those weird friends that are like, I need to know, tell me have you ever shat yourself and passed out in front of other people? Yes, and I don't mind those people. I'm happy to talk about my symptoms and my illness. I don't feel ashamed because of it. I feel sad that other people are like, oh, I don't want to talk about this. It's, you know, but they'll quite happily tell you about when they had the flu, or, you know, do you face any ableism? I've experienced some ableism. People think it's not a real illness and, you know, you're just making it up or exaggerating. I've literally been told that by medical professionals, so that's a fun thing. What do you do in those situations when you experience ableism? Have you ever been let down by medical professionals? Because being told that you're making it up is not really good for the self-esteem, that's for sure. Do you find there's any medication that helps you? Do you find that there's any supplements that help you? Do you find easier ways to manage the additional costs of having a chronic illness and a disability? Because you generally have to buy many more things that a healthy person without such an illness does. And let me know. I need to know these things, and I can also share what I've found out in that time, and we can create a little positive, supportive community for ourselves, because there are communities out there, there are self-help groups. I find them to be kind of almost an echo chamber of sadness sometimes. They are more like the kind of places to go to kind of, so that other people can take turns in saying what their experience is, and but just kind of complain about it. I would rather have a practical solution or talk about what I can do to feel better, rather than just complaining relentlessly about it. If I'm going to complain about it, I want to use it for humour. You know, I want to say, oh, this is terrible, but here's the really funny side of that. Like the time when I went into a chemist one day, and this was back before I was getting prescribed medication to help manage my symptoms, and I was asking what they had for diarrhea, and I would say, oh no, I've tried that one, no, anything else, no, that one's not good, that kind of thing. And the pharmacist looked at me and said, oh, is it really bad, the diarrhea? I said, please tell me about the good kinds. I want to know, because all I know is it's just horrific, and some medication doesn't work for it. So knowing that I can have humour in those moments helps me to go through my day without feeling that I've just complained about it. I don't really like to complain. I'd rather turn a complaint into a joke than to just go on and on and on about it. And that's fine. Complaining is therapeutic and it is healthy as well. And we need to let it out. There should be space for that. But I want the humour there as well. And I'm not finding that in any of the places that I've been to online. Obviously, a lot of BAM people don't meet in person. There are generally AGMs that they have where people do meet up in person, but a lot of the time people can't go if they're feeling unwell on that day. But there are moments in the day where I just want to laugh about something, and I don't want for it to be a terrible sadness. And so if you're like me and you want that as well, then this is the right place for us, isn't it? So I plan on introducing some toilet humour, certainly. at some point to help. I do have a bit of a naughty mind, and you know, that can be too much for some people, so trigger warning. But if you're into toilet humour like me, then this is the place for you. And we can share our jokes for sure, and keep each other entertained regarding our illnesses, and share some advice on how to interact with non-badasses about it, because other humans don't really seem to get it. How do your partners cope? My partner, he's very good. He's very understanding. He's very tolerant of my limitations. He doesn't pressure me. He does get a bit more stir crazy than I do. He's not willing to stay at home as much, so he does go out by himself without me, which I'm fine with, because he shouldn't have to be all cooped up just because I don't feel like going outside. But we've, you know, made many adaptations in our home to make life more tolerable for my illness and myself, and for him to help me as well. And he's been great. It is literally wonderful to have a partner who is understanding and capable of offering you that level of support. He is wonderful. Are your partners the same? Do you have a non-helpful partner? Do you have a partner that's kind of embarrassed that you have a disability? Do you have someone as helpful and supportive as I do? I'm very lucky. We've been together a long time. He's very helpful. But he doesn't like the toilet humour. He's not tolerant of listening to me talk about poop in great detail. He doesn't want to hear my references to different texture combinations and Bristol number 4s, and or one of the favourite ones that the fellow badasses with BAM, when you get a combination of textures, there's one we refer to as the champagne cork, a 4 followed by a 7. Yeah, not everyone's going to be able or willing to go that deep into the poop world. But anyway, that's what we're all about here. So I'll leave it here for today, my fellow badasses, and I look forward to seeing you again. And keep pooping, have a good bowel movement, try not to lose your shit, and we'll speak soon. Bye.